I know like on the educational side, they were doing a lot of stuff for in-store education. And that just simply means that there was a lot of money being dumped into all these different areas of what it means to have a brick and mortar store. So, I think we were all really jazzed to see it open up to private, but I'm not really sure like throwing out everything that was kind of created or built kind of before then was really the right approach.
When you put it like that, my cynical mind goes to, well, now this new government can say, look how much money the old government wasted on this and that, in the next fiscal quarter, it's going to be, there is all this wasted money when, they had a direct hand in that. And, that's the way political parties have been doing things for ages. And that could have been, it's the sole intention, So it's frustrating. And you're right, like they have the LCBO still for alcohol in Ontario, which, you will catch me ranting about the LCBO on any given moment of any given day. I'm from Alberta, so, it's private there. And hey, who would have thought Alberta was going to come out as this cannabis, haven in all this, right?
How is Alberta killing it? Alberta's killing it.
It's and that's, so I'm speaking at South by Southwest in March, and I'm super excited. I'm really nervous. But one thing I think I want to hit on is this fact that you may think more conservative states like maybe Ohio, it was really close to legalization. And so you may think, oh, I'm not going to put a lot of lobbying effort into a place like that. It's more conservative leaning. But, similar to Alberta, I bet Ohio is conservative leaning, but then also loves money in that same way, and
it's small business, of course.
Exactly. And so in that way, Alberta has totally jumped on board, right? In that kind of free enterprise spirit of Alberta. So
they were just so much more prepared in a so much more timely fashion. When really, we were kind of we in Ontario were kind of at the beginning of creating what these models would look like. Alberta was already holding seminars for entrepreneurs who were looking to get involved in the retail space. So they just kind of seemed like they were always one step, ahead of other provinces. And I think it's kind of, it's reflected now. I know there's always kind of these kind of bigger federal top-down supply issues that are a problem, but I'm not sure it warrants a cap of 25 stores in Ontario.
Oh, but that's, I guess, it, right? They're so concerned with the black market. That's what it all boils down to. And that's what these votes in Hamilton are going to boil down to. I was talking to my city councillor who is incredibly anti-cannabis retail here in the city, and he's leading a charge to vote no. And it's all about, being tough on the black market and the criminal element. And I'm like, but you're legalizing it, so it's not the criminal element. And they're like, it's tied to this, it's tied to that. I'm like, A, not that I've seen, and B, then arrest them for those things.
Yeah.
I never got that argument of it's tied to this. It's so arrest them for those worse things. Those things have worse off penalties. They'll be in jail for longer. That's what cops, that's what detectives and DAs and DAs, look at me, I'm Law and Order, but that's what, that's what
Absolutely.
The criminal justice system should be doing. If they actually think someone is a dangerous offender, they should be getting them at the, what I mean? They shouldn't be like, oh, well, I'm going to get this person on weed charges because they claim that they're involved in child trafficking and, the fentanyl crisis and all these things, right? That there's all these links. So it's just I don't want you arresting those people on cannabis charges anyway.
Yeah.
So that argument never made sense to me. But
also, there isn't really a lot of data in Canada that supports that dispensaries are involved in kind of other criminal activity. Even with, there was always this kind of discussion around MMAR growers, so growers under the old system, and kind of their link to criminal organizations. But we really have no data, no convincing data that really, makes that connection. I think that that's just a really easy narrative that enforcement can kind of use and kind of rely on. But for me, I'm always thinking about, I remember seeing this ad for Oregon, and it was this white dude in a suit, and he was standing there, and he just started talking about how it's a win if we get more people to go legal. So the whole tagline was let's let's go legal. But it was like aimed at growers, it was aimed at retailers, and it was aimed at consumers, which like, I wish that we had more of a kind of top-down lens like that thought about how, we're not going to, for example, make all these consumers go legal right off the bat. But if we start giving them kind of better access and better education, that over time we can build up some kind of rapport with consumers and kind of slowly over time, kind of have them move to more of a legal supply. And that in and of itself should be a win. Focusing on all these criminal, so-called criminal elements of kind of this legacy market, it's not really doing anything for us. It's not serving us in any way. And, I've been thinking a lot about this because of the police have really increased powers when it comes to dispensaries in terms of what they can do. I was just reading, I think it was a store in Hamilton where it sounded like they actually seized the property. And they were talking about how they could face fines of up to $250,000 with an additional $100,000 each day if they keep operating after charges have been laid. So like it's affecting the landlords who own the property, and then of course like business owners as well. But man, we're also talking about facing jail times now as well. And in places like Hamilton, how many dispensaries would you think are currently operating there?
40 at least.
Wow, 40, eh? I was going to say like 20.
And maybe it's closer to that. I am always one to over-exaggerate, but at its peak, it's been, double that. So I'm sure
absolutely
at least 20. But yeah, I could not agree with you more. And that's completely eloquently said in terms of the data. And then in my opinion, and from what I've seen, like I remember one time I think it was Bill Player say, well, we're legalizing because currently 100% of cannabis in the black market is tied to organized crime. And that is laughable and ludicrous. Like I know myself, dozens of people who the only thing that makes them a criminal is their association to cannabis, and at all levels of that. So to just actually pretend that doesn't exist is like some kind of like how we were saying before, freaky government. What are you trying to convince us of? Deal in reality. And this is reality, especially like you said, we look around Hamilton, we see it and it's there. So,
yeah. And if we're talking about the things that Bill Blair has been saying, I mean, what I always like to remind people is that the arguments that the government are currently using for the legalization of cannabis are easily extendable to all drugs. Like we're in the middle of this opioid crisis. We can't get the government to move. And when they talk about cannabis and the reasons why they're legalizing, I just can't fathom why that can't be applied to all other drugs. Like if you talk about how the criminalization of drugs or the criminalization of cannabis, it, has been a lot worse for people than the use of the drug itself, or that, regulating and legalizing certain substances, ends up in having less harms and is better for public health and public safety. I mean, how do we not naturally extend that to a bunch of other drugs that clearly need, a different approach, different regulation? Maybe it's not legalization in all cases, but it's just so ironic to me that they can't even see the irony in what they're saying when on the one hand, they're like, we're legalizing and regulating because it's the right thing to do. But, we don't have the political will right now to legalize anything else. To me, that's just it's so backwards.
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating. It's like if they were on a debate team, you lost. And like you said, there's 10, 15 other arguments you could use even to legalize cannabis. But the arguments they choose, like keeping out of the hands of children, and have been choosing lately because pre-election they were different. But anyway, that's a whole story. But keeping out of the hands of children, safe drug supply, all those things. That is exactly the arguments. Like you said, that makes even more sense for other drugs, especially in the middle of an opioid epidemic like this, where people are actually dying every day. It's like heartbreaking how many people are dying. And that is a safe drug supply is that, like you said, the argument that they make, you naturally extend that out, and then you're like, wait, you kind of played yourself, because let me get this straight, It's like, and again, too, it's like once they admit that criminalization is more harmful than the drug itself, which, multiple counselors, multiple MPs now are on that train. How do you ever go back? It's a slap in the face, really. It's what it is.
Yeah, it really is. I think it also comes down to like a misunderstanding and like what public health is. You know, when I hear Bill Blair talk about, you know, that we're regulating and we're legalizing because, we're using a public health model, but then his next sentence is quite literally, we've introduced like 40 plus new penalties again, or cannabis infractions. Like, you know, the idea that criminalization and public health are compatible is it's the wrong place to start, that doesn't even make sense if you're a public health person. So the idea that they kind of layer in, criminal, that they're being safer and that things are safer because they've introduced all these new criminal penalties is actually at odds with public health and how we think about public health. So I could go on forever about Bill because he just really, really pisses me off.
Yeah, you're right. And it's frustrating because I go back and forth whether that is, you're right, like huge misunderstandings. And we aren't there yet as a society about like what those things mean. Two, I think some people, maybe Bill Blair being one of them, specifically co-opt that language because they know that is what, maybe quote unquote people want to hear. And there is only so much people can do to push back, and they say at these press conferences and stuff, this is the case, and then they turn around and they walk away, and you don't really have the chance. And it must be frustrating for you and all the work and the research that you've done. And these people are just going on, that guy they knew when they were young who smoked weed, or some anecdote that their uncle told them, or whatever it is. And that's, what's mandating policy. It must be so frustrating.
Of course. Yeah. I think it's just frustrating for, a lot of people. I think from like all different angles, like people who are entrepreneurs have been disappointed. I mean, medical cannabis patients are being crushed under the legal system. I mean, there have been a few LPs that I think are trying to safeguard supply, but really kind of medical patients in this whole thing were like kind of an afterthought, right? That there was I don't know if there could have been a mechanism in legislation that said, if you as a producer take on 1,000 patients, you have to have enough product to serve those 1,000 patients. I don't know if that would have ever been a possibility, but I think it's disappointing that it's not. And I'm not really sure. Oh, and of course the excise tax. So another layer of taxation for medical patients. So how would you say the legal pot regime is working for Canadians?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think right now it's not. I mean, I want to get my hands on like arrests data and stuff too, and see how that pans out in like 6 to 12 months, because like that's obviously super important and part of it. And hopefully, like, I want to be the type of positive person that says like it's going to take a while to normalization out. But I think there are places that have legalized where like arrests have gone up and stuff as well. So if we're talking about all these access problems with the medical system, which there is hugely, and it wasn't like that, like there was huge promises for that, but you're right. How do you kind of legislate that in a system that is so inaccessible? And so I think what interests me is like court hearings and when these things go to court and what will pan out that way, because that's always kind of been the case in the last couple of years in terms of like where the penalties actually come down hard and stuff, right? Like, the cops say whatever on the news, we're going to raid all these and this is so illegal and blah, blah, blah. But, then charges don't stick and places pop back up for legitimate reasons. And so it actually makes me think about something like, and because access, and the argument has always been like, if access is bad and you're supplying access, that makes sense. And now access is worse. So, I mean, I logically think you could extend that argument and say that, you have more justification to do that, especially if, if you're a city like Hamilton and you're going to deny cannabis retail, which, so I struggle. I wonder if it does give more leeway if access is less. And if that's the case too, which it has been in the past, it's so messed up. I mean, the whole system is so messed up. And like you said, it's so different. You can be so isolated and insulated from it, where, if you're in Alberta or you're in BC or you have good access in Ontario, wherever you are. And other people are just like, A, they could be in pain or like need it badly for medical reasons, therapeutic reasons, or B, it's Canada and we should all be able to enjoy the same freedoms and liberties as each other. I think it's absolutely outrageous. Anything less. For a government to strive for anything less than that is absurd.
Yeah, and just to pick up on a